When you're done working on a composition, it's time to render and export. The primary way of rendering and exporting output movies from After Effects is using the render queue. With our composition active, we'll choose File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Notice there are some other options, including outputting to a SWF file to play in Flash Player, or to an XFL file to bring in for further work in Flash Professional, or even as an Adobe Premiere Pro project. But nearly all the time, you'll use the render queue. The render queue panel opens. Let's give ourselves a little bit more room to work here by dragging on the divider line between the panels. Here we have our render item, which has the name of the composition, and render settings, and output module settings. If you click the triangle, you can read the render settings. And if you want to modify the render settings, you click the name of the current render settings module, and the render settings dialog box opens. We'll just walk through these options really quickly. By default, you'll output to best quality at full resolution, without using the proxy files, and having effects and solo switches at their current settings. If you just wanted to render a movie for a quick preview, or to pass off to someone else just to check something such as timing, you might go for draft quality. You might go for only a partial resolution. You might use proxy files, which are usually low resolution replacements for files. Or you might even turn off effects. But very, very often, you'll just stick with these defaults. You can output to whatever frame rate you like. The frame rate setting here in render settings is telling the render item what frame rate to use to sample from the composition. I'll click OK to accept these render settings. If you choose from the menu here, by clicking the triangle, you can pick from various render settings templates, including settings for DV video, draft settings, settings that are appropriate for rendering across a network with multiple machines, and you can even create your own render settings template. The render settings determine how the final image is created from the composition, but then the output module settings determine how that final image is encoded and converted into an output file. I'll click Lossless, which is the name of the current output module template in use, so that we can open the output module settings dialog box. Here's where we choose the file format. The default on Windows is AVI. The default on Mac OS is QuickTime. And here we can choose from any number of output formats. Let's say, for example, I want to use QuickTime. Then I can choose under Format Options which codec to use within my QuickTime movie. I'll click Cancel. There are many alternatives for formats, including image sequences, audio-only formats, various video formats, and many of these video formats, such as QuickTime, AVI, F4V, and FLV, actually refer to containers. And so when you pick one of these, you need to also specify which codec to use inside of this container. If you have an alpha channel in your composition and you wish to include the alpha channel on output, you choose that here by choosing either alpha only or RGB and alpha. And here you can choose the color bit depth of your output. The plus refers to the alpha channel. And you have various options for resizing or cropping your output. You can also choose an output module by choosing a template. I'll choose Lossless with Alpha. If you click the plus sign, you add an output module, and you can set a different format for each of these output modules. The rendering is the part that takes the most time in most cases. So if you only render once and then encode, in this case, 5 times, you save much time compared to having a separate render item for each format. So this setup here with one render item and 5 output modules is much more efficient than an alternative such as this, where you simply have 5 render items, each with only 1 output module. I duplicated those, by the way, by pressing Control-D. That would be Command-D on Mac OS. So this is the less efficient way. So I'll undo that by pressing Control-Z. You need to specify an output location, and you can do that by clicking the current name here. I'll click Cancel. And here, you can decide what format or what pattern the output file is named in. Here's a handy tip. If you know that you're always going to be outputting to the same format, create an output module template for that format, and then when you choose that output module template from the menu, hold Control. So if I always output FLV with alpha, I hold Control as I select this. Now, when I add a new composition to the render queue, it's added using that output module template. Once we've set everything up the way that we like, just click Render. And we get status about the current render, a progress bar, a preview of the render in progress, and information about the estimated time remaining. I'll pause. And notice that if you pause a render, you can click Continue to continue it. However, if you click Stop, you no longer have the ability to continue. However, After Effects goes ahead and re-queues items so that you can just click Render again and pick up where you left off. For the item that didn't even start, it's just duplicated, but for the item that had started, After Effects is telling you that it will continue from this time. So that's really all there is to rendering using the render queue. You set your render settings. Very often you use a render settings template by just choosing from the menu. You set your output module settings. And very often, once you've set everything up, you'll just use your standard output module template. And then when you have a set of items ready to go, you click Render. And sometimes go away and have a cup of coffee or lunch and come back to your finished rendered output movies.